My name's George Milliken, and I work with the digital learning teaching team here at Education Scotland. I'm joined with my colleague Scott Hunter, who's the Education Officer for Cyber Resilience and Internet Safety, also part of our team here at Education Scotland, and our colleague Eva Wilkinson is also joining us tonight, who's also part of our digital learning teaching team too. So firstly, again, thank you for taking the time on a lovely, it's very dark where I am, so I don't imagine it's much brighter anywhere else, so thanks for taking the time to come and to be with us tonight. In this session, what we wanted to look at is cyber resilience and internet safety. We'll give you some opportunities to post into the chat. In fact, you can post in at any point, but there will be a few points where we'll turn it around and just ask for some thoughts and some ideas from yourselves regarding cyber resilience, which will be the particular focus in this session. The first wee bit I just wanted to talk about at the very start was around the why we're running the session and why we teach cyber resilience and internet safety in our curriculum. In the first part, to just consider about learning and engagement. So the ideas we're going to try and present in this session this evening, we're going to try and think about giving you some practical examples as well for how you can approach cyber resilience with your learners. But say the key parts are the quality of teaching and the effective use of assessment. So again, we're going to ask you to think about how you teach and how you assess your learners and check that they're making progress. Again, just to balance that, having a think about your how, and take one part of this, take a strand and think about it and develop it. Practice it with your learners and think about how you take that forward, how you develop it, and what the impact was on your learners. Think about one part, one strand of cyber resilience. And think about how you can take that forward and develop it with your learners, but focusing on one at a time and thinking about how you can improve it and how you can make it have more impact and be more meaningful for your children and young people. So, but the key here we really want to think about is how you teach it, how you assess it, and we've got some examples of how to do that, and again we'd love to hear your thoughts on that in the chat as we go. So by no means do we have every answer, so it's a real good opportunity for you to share that with your colleagues and fellow practitioners tonight. So that's the way we want to approach that. So I'm going to hand over to you, Scott, if you're ready, just to have a wee quick recap of the E's and O's there.
Yep, thanks George, and good evening everybody. And what we've got in this slide here is just a recap of the E's and O's that will be taught within early years right up to primary school. And you can see within the E's and O's that there is a emphasis on safety and security all the way through each level of E's and O's, and this is to give progression as we move forward within the curriculum and get that good understanding between the difference between internet safety and cyber resilience. So most of us will probably have been teaching internet safety in our class and we'll be familiar with these E's and O's, but tonight's webinar is to let you look at cyber resilience and where does that come into the E's and O's. So we're very good at identifying safety within the E's and O's, but now we're going to start looking at the security and the resilience aspect within the internet safety and cyber resilience.
What parts of those are cyber? What does cyber resilience look like within the E's and O's? What practices and activities are you doing with your learners? So anything that you teach about with your learners or any activities that you've done with your learners, particularly focusing on cyber resilience rather than internet safety, and just to see any thoughts people have. And again, if you're unsure, even just to share some ideas, but identify those as internet safety, just to get a kind of feel for where people are with that.
As you can see there on the slide that George has got, this is our message for internet safety: safe, smart and kind. So this is allow us to address the behaviours that young people are demonstrating when they're online, to be able to keep them safe, for them to be smart when they're online, and for them to be kind when they're online. And this is just related to the internet safety part of cyber resilience and internet safety.
Yeah, I think it's a really good opportunity, certainly around those words that we chose for that, to make links to the health and wellbeing curriculum and thinking about, you know, those behaviours that we want to see from learners, as Scott's just said, and against our wee part there about a kind of a focus on the person here, and that's quite important with regards to the cyber resilience. So really with internet safety, we're focusing on the person, and keeping them safe in particular.
And what we have here is the Scottish Government definitions of cyber resilience, and you can see that you need to learn from deliberate attacks or accidental events that happen online. And you can see this is a clear focus, as George said there. Internet safety is about the person, for them to be smart, to be safe, smart and kind while they're online. What cyber resilience is going to start looking at is the device. How do you keep your device safe from deliberate attacks or accidental events? So, for example, a deliberate attack might be hacking into somebody's system, performing a thing called a denial of service attack onto a server, whereas an accidental event would be downloading a virus. So if you're downloading a free computer game onto your computer and the virus comes in along with it, so that's an accidental event. You've not deliberately, somebody's not deliberately sent you a virus, but you've just downloaded it. Or another sort of accidental event is phishing emails. You might get sent a phishing email, which we'll look at further on in the webinar. But what we're trying to do here is distinguish between the difference between the person and the device. And we'll look at cyber resilience and looking at the device. How do you keep your device safe? What security settings you can use or strategies you can use to make sure you don't come victim of this accidental event as you're using the World Wide Web and the internet. So I think the key emphasis we've got to have there is the difference between the person and the device. And we'll look at cyber resilience and how you recover from that, so it doesn't happen to you again. So you and your device become more resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can see from the Scottish Government statement there about prepare for, withstand and rapidly recover and learn isn't quite as catchy. So with that, we've sort of rephrased some of that for our wording of it going forward, is to ask you to consider talking with your learners about recognise, react and recover. So as Scott said, to be able to recognise what the risks are, to be able to take the appropriate action to that, and then to be able to recover and learn going forward. So that's what we're thinking about as our 3 R's of cyber resilience. And feel free to use that if that's something you want to use in your class, your school. Feel free to use that graphic and that phrasing or the Scottish Government wording as well. But quite important that we understand the Scottish Government definition of cyber resilience.
So if we start looking at passwords, this is an area of cyber resilience that we'll all be familiar with. Everybody has to have a password if you're accessing social media, and every learner will have access to have a password to access their Glow account. What we need to make sure as teachers and educators that we're doing is modelling the advice that we're given. So for example, the National Cyber Security Centre says a strong password would have 3 random words generated in it. You don't tell anybody your password, and you certainly don't use generic passwords where everybody's got the same password, or you don't use, for example, password 1. Again, learners will have, you'll teach this in your class and learners will know the knowledge behind it, but do we model that or do we demonstrate that? So if we think about within our school, within our primary school, do we set generic class passwords, for example, primary 7? Do we send passwords home to parents to allow them to access Glow and check for what homework's actually been done at this moment in time, or what the learners have? That is not modelling the behaviour, right? That is not modelling what we're teaching the learners within our class. So we'll be teaching them to create a strong password with 3 random words and not to share that with anybody. Then we might be modelling, we're setting a generic password, which is password 7 for primary 7s, which is not secure, doesn't follow the rules, and then we're making it generic so every P7 is able to log on to Glow using the same password, so we're not resetting the passwords. Now, that leads us on to our rights and responsibilities. So we need to make sure it's the learner's right to have a secure password. They know how to make it. But our responsibility is obviously to model that behaviour. It is, under the Computer Misuse Act, is illegal to log on to somebody else, and that's what's be classed as hacking. Hacking is termed as gaining unauthorised access to a computer system. So if you send a username and password home for a parent to check, they don't have access or permission to access Glow, that's technically illegal. Will you be prosecuted for that? Very, very, not really. Very slim chance you ever been prosecuted for that, because it's not in the public's best interest. What it will mean is, if schools set generic passwords and send them home, and parents log on and the Glow team become aware of that, then it probably cause for the whole school to be reset, password reset to take place. Okay, so you need to be aware of your rights and responsibilities and what you're modelling under cyber resilience. They said with this is a key part of cyber resilience, to be able to get a strong password. Okay, so again, think about your rights and responsibilities and make sure you're modelling that behaviour.
And absolutely, just the last wee bit to add there, because I'm aware, looking at it on my own screen, that knowledge of the law sounds quite high level, but I think at this stage, as Scott's identified there, just to make learners aware that accessing someone else's account without their permission is illegal, and that's, you know, under the term hacking. So we're not talking about quoting specific branches of the law and different acts, for example, but making learners aware that there are activities that they do. It might not be illegal to, or it certainly isn't illegal to share a picture of someone without their permission, but if I share a picture of someone who's partially clothed, for example, or a picture with sexual content of someone who's under a certain age, then that does become illegal. And again, it might seem for the primary school that's quite a high level thing to be talking about, but again, research shows it's around about the age of 11 to 13 that learners that young people start to share sexually explicit content. So I'm only going to ask the question, when is it that we start to address that, or even to make learners aware that it's not only dangerous or inappropriate, but also illegal to share such images. So something to have a think about is, if your learners, if you're working up the school and you've got 9, 10, 11-year-olds, if they've not already started to share inappropriate images, then they might just be about to be on the cusp of that. So something to have a think about, and not an easy question, and I certainly doubt there's an easy answer to that. So something to just think about going forward. Just a quick part there about passwords. We've in fact got a simple lesson, an activity on our Did You Learn Scots site that I'll point you towards at the end. Just asking again those same things that Scott's identified already about passwords. We put it together as a kind of PowerPoint you could take your learners through just as a starter activity to really focus on that. So not something we're going to spend a lot of time on tonight. The advice is quite simple there from the National Cyber Agency there, that 3 random words, that's the key part to it. So as Scott said, how do we then model that? It's easy to make 3 random words, but how do we model that in our behaviours going forward? And that's what we'd like you to have a think about with that. So pass back to you for this activity then, Scott.
Right, certainly, and this is again going to focus more on the cyber resilience aspect of it. And again, every single website in the world has its own URL. It's a unique URL. Now, not what everybody might not understand this, but the URL will split up into 3 different sections. So the first part of the HTTPS is what we call your protocol, or a set of rules. So the second part, the bit we've got here is education. That is the domain name. That's the English equivalent of a thing called an IP address. And then the bit at the end is the extension, the .gov.scot. Now, for a website to get its HTTPS, it needs to get a secure certificate. So it needs to register for that security certificate. And then, so the 3 aspects of your URL is your protocol at the beginning, the HTTPS. Again, you need a security certificate to get the S at the end of it. So some websites will be HTTP. The S just means that is going to be, your data is going to be encrypted. The bit in the middle, the yellow bit, It's called your domain name. That part is an English version and IP address. It's easy to remember education rather than a computer's IP address or device's IP address. Again, these are all unique. Okay, and then the bit at the end, the .gov.scot, to get the .gov.scot extension, you need to register and go through Scottish Government procedures to get that extension at the end. So just understanding the basics of a URL can make your learners more secure. As you can see, the three different parts. So if you look at the protocol in more detail, so the first part of it, the red part, is just a set of rules. So that's a set of rules to communicate. Okay. Now your protocol can either be, there's a number of different protocols, but most commonly every web page will start with HTTP. This means it's not secure. The S is a combination of another protocol called a secure socket layer, which is encryption. Make sure your data is put into a cipher as it's passed on to the internet and passed between the two devices. So you can see here, there's two different protocols, even if a learner can identify the difference between them. For example, knowing that HTTPS is more secure, so it reduces the risk, rather than having the HTTP protocol, which when you develop a website and put it onto a web server, you'll use HTTP. But to get the S, you need to go through an authentication process to get that. So then if we move on to the domain name part of it, the IP address.
Can I just come in for a wee second there, Scott?
Yeah.
And say, I think as well it can be, perhaps to think about it, might be looking and thinking there's a lot of jargon perhaps on the screen there as well. But as you see, the key part in the slide there that Scott's highlighted is that part of understanding that the learners perhaps don't need to necessarily at primary school understand about how a secure socket layer works, but understanding just that S at the end of the HTTPS does in fact mean that the website is more likely to be safe, and that's part of the language as well. Keep me right on that, Scott, that when we want to talk about safe and secure online, we want to talk about being more safe and more secure, because it's quite difficult to guarantee that something is absolutely safe or secure. But a great wee point to jump off from here is either if you're going down this path of learning with your learners, is to think about looking at internet safety, internet and networks as part of your computing science learning. So you could look at that technology, about the computer systems and how devices connect to the internet. There's learning to do there, and that might in fact be your way into learning about cyber resilience. So you could go either way there about start with the cyber resilience and then looking at the internet as part of a network and computing science to better understand perhaps protocols and the need for protocols and how the internet works. And I think as well, as Scott's pointed out in the slide, it's a really good bit to see where this learning goes as well, to see where that strand follows through. And indeed we've got a webinar tomorrow looking at the kind of senior phase approach, but it's quite good for learners to, even if they don't have to understand what a secure socket layer is, but to even hear some of those technical terms being used, because that's something they might be going on to progress into in other parts of their learning.
Yeah, and then the key part for this one to take away is that every domain name is unique. You can't have two domain names exactly the same. So you've seen the example I had previously with education. It wasn't Education Scotland, it was education. There might be another website with Education Scotland on it. For example, Google. There's only one google.com. Okay, so you can't have a website with the same name, two websites with the same name. They have to be unique. So having that ability to understand that every website is unique, again, can reduce the risk of learners becoming victims of cybercrime that might want to get you to log on and put your bank details in. For certain scams, you've heard of people transferring their money to fraudsters. If you check the URL and make sure it's not the same, you check the URL to make sure it's the exact same one. For example, RBS, there's only one RBS. .co.uk, you look at that, make sure it's using the S, and that reduces the risk of you becoming a victim to that type of scam where you're asked in your bank details. And It's quite easy to clone a website. You can clone a website straightforward, but what you can't do is have the exact same URL. So looking at the address bar in your web browser, or even getting the learners to identify where the address bar is in your browser, and looking at making sure they're looking at the domain name and reading the domain name and not just automatically clicking on a link. Something as simple as that is reading it before you click on it can save you a lot of hassle in the long run, whether you could be going to a cloned website or if you're downloading stuff. So that is a key thing to remember, that every URL must be unique. And then the other thing we're going to look at, the third and final part of the URL we're going to look at today, is the extension. So you can see here, we've got examples of google.com, google.co.uk, google.se. So this is a good example where you can look at your learners, and these extensions mean certain things. For example, .com would mean commercial. That means it's a commercial organisation. Any commercial organisation or individual can register a .com. Right, that's fine. So if you look at the extension, the last part of the URL, then that can give you a bit of help to identify the organisation and some clue of its origin, where it is in the world. So you've all seen .co.uk, means it's in the United Kingdom. Anybody, any ideas what SE is? Google.se. Google.se is Sweden. So having that ability to understand the extension to URL, I think, is a very good bit of learning for learners to have, because if they know .com means commercial, that anyone can register that, as I said before. .co.uk just means commercial UK. .org is a non-profit organisation or charity. .gov is a government agency, so we've got .gov.scot, and that just gives you a bit of assurance that that's an official website or official information you're getting from .gov.scot or .gov. Again, the .net domain extension is usually for internet service providers or network service providers. Again, having that ability to understand about your extension of the URL gives you that wee bit of security. You know, if it's .co, then you know anybody can have that. .co.uk, any individual could register. I can register a .com or a .co.uk domain name, but I can't register a .gov domain name, okay? Because there's certain procedures you would have to go through to have the .gov.scot extension at the end of it. So again, having that ability for your learners to just look at the URL, split it up into 3 areas, look at the S, make sure you've got HTTPS, and look at the extension. If it's .gov.scot, then you know that's going to be a secure website, and that's reducing your risk. Whereas you're looking for this example, sorry George, on you go, the example we've got next. If you look at this example, and then if you can read the URL and then put in the chat anything that sticks out to you that might be a bit iffy about this email, this URL.
And again, I think just to my thoughts on that with my kind of primary school teacher hat on, and thinking about all those points that Scott's taken us through, if we understand how those protocols work, and the fact that simply reading that wee address bar at the top of the page can help save us quite a bit of pain with regards to online risks and dangers there. So it's thinking about where those bits of learning come from, and again, I think a really good way to do that is to have those discussions with your learners. And we saw on the last page there that we were sharing some of the different examples of extensions. There's obviously a lot more than that out there. I think every country's got its own extension as well, but it's about, again, getting your learners to think, why would a website from someone in Scotland have a Swedish extension in the end of it? And it might be a totally legitimate reason, but it's one of those ones, at least as long as they're being suspicious about that and they're questioning it.
Just jumping out to you straight away, if you've told the learners to look for the S and look at the extension, you see there's no S there, and you see RU means Russia, so that could be a bit of a dodgy website. Okay, so I wouldn't put my details onto that, or I wouldn't go to that, or I wouldn't click in the link.
Just to clarify, it could be a totally legitimate website that's based in Russia, but it's one of those ones I would ask why, or certainly I would want my learners to consider why an English language website is registered in Russia and not perhaps .com or .co.uk more likely. And also again, if there's other wee bits and pieces that you might pick up on the news, for example, around sites that might be hosted in other countries. So just to make your learners aware of some of those risks.
Right, so again, some people got it right. Mr. Hunter got it right, no relation to mine. And in the chat there, that RU would be Russia. So again, knowing a wee bit about cybersecurity, there's a lot of ransomware attacks and scams come out of Russia. So that would be the first sort of warning sign you would have before that. And I would try and train or teach the learners to look at the extension as well as the name, okay, the domain name. Look at the extension and look at the protocol. And if they're not matching up, then I would be saying, well, it might be more risk associated with going to that website, as George says. And then if you're on the website and it's based in Russia and it's in English, then again, that could add more to the risk. So again, at that point, how would we then sort of look at that and look at reacting to that if we've clicked on this website? So if we've recognised it, if we look at think back to our 3 R's of cyber resilience, and then if we've recognised it, how do we react to it and how do we recover? And I'll hand over to George for that one.
Yep, so I think, as we say, it's the learners perhaps don't have to know how an internet protocol works, but at least if they are identifying, as Scott says, that they're seeing parts, they're starting to recognise things that at least just make them suspicious, at a very minimum. They're at least questioning before they put any personal details into websites. Again, sometimes it's that wee bit of problem solving about thinking, this website says it's registered and it's someone in Edinburgh, and then again the extension doesn't add up to that. So a few wee bits to consider around that. What we then want to think about with our learners is if we've got them recognised and we want them to react, and some of the things that you would probably do with this, again, feel free to put any other answers into the chat as we go through, but the ones that we thought about would be closing the browser first, clearing your browser cookies, perhaps updating, if you haven't done that recently, your antivirus software and making sure to run your antivirus. Just have a scan of your device, because if you've went onto a website that's potentially a bit fishy, or there's something just doesn't quite add up about it, better to be safe than sorry, so come straight off the website. But if you've already accessed it, having a think about how you clear out your computer to get rid of anything that might be lingering. So again, going onto a less than reputable website, might have put malware or anything else onto your computer. So it's just worth clearing things off and making sure that there's as little trace as possible of that website or any unwanted programs such as malware on your device. And that wee part about recover is about thinking, keeping that in mind, that I went to that website. I remember my teacher talking about questioning the HTTPS, and next time I won't do that. And it's about learning as well within that recovery part. So it's thinking about how do I avoid this again in future. So even if it comes at the top of a Google search, before I click on that link, I want to have a look at it and see if there's anything that stands out about that URL, and just thinking about keeping myself safe. What I want to do is then draw, again, as I say, very much my primary teacher hat on here, and having a think about where the opportunities across the curriculum come in. And again, I've done a few webinars recently with my colleagues in the Literacy and English team, so it's really good to see where those links come across the different areas between the technologies and literacy and English. And the key ones I've put on there are thinking about under tools for reading and writing. I use that in my own class a few times, where I've given them phishing emails or examples of phishing emails, and straight away, primary 4, 5, 6 learners are quick to point out that there's spelling mistakes, it's not used the right punctuation, or there's no punctuation, and even again, some of those more confident learners will point out that the sentence structure just doesn't work right. It's either grammatically incorrect or it's just, you know, a badly written sentence. It's perhaps too long, or there's too many short sentences. So again, it can be quite a good activity for getting, you know, quite active for learners to get engaged with that, to have an actual problem, a real world example, and thinking about how they can use their literacy skills to check that. And again, quite like to red pen it and go through and make their own notes on that, what it should read like. I'd also consider under persuasive writing as well. We've seen an example in a wee second, but again, for me, the obvious one there is your bossy verbs, but you also see things like time constraints. So the sort of stuff that, again, we teach with our learners, and Scott shared with me before a fantastic example that he did with senior phase pupils, where they were using what they learned about online digital footprints to create their own phishing emails now, or practice ones. But what I don't know, perhaps you do want to create examples of phishing emails with your learners, but that might feel that it's maybe not age and stage appropriate. But I think, again, to look at phishing emails and asking your learners, can they identify the techniques in there, the persuasion, can they see that happening? And you'll see that in a wee second, hopefully. And the last part as well, what I talk about in terms of literacy, is the focus on critical literacy. And it perhaps sits a wee bit between the cyber resilience and internet safety, but that bit part that learners should be able to analyse and be critical of what they see online. So where we were saying a moment ago about looking at the URLs and the web address and being critical of that and being suspicious and questioning, that's the sort of inquiring minds we need our learners to have when they're dealing with anything online. So whether it is internet or web related, we've got to have our learners who are going to question the source and the purpose. You know, what is someone trying to do with this website? Are they trying to, whether it's trying to persuade me, or is it that they're trying to get me to buy something or download something, and they can use their critical literacy and their persuasive writing skills to hopefully read a wee bit of that. Again, that last part at the end is always the one I would come back to, though. Does it sound too good to be true? So here's an example from the Royal Bank of Scotland, or they've created this as an example of what a phishing email might look like. And again, hopefully you can see there are parts jumping out to you. And just put it out to the comments, but I don't know if there's, if I ask you what's the first thing that you spot that's up with this email, what's the first thing that draws your attention to it? Quite interesting. Yep, grammar, absolutely, Mrs. Riley, straight away, spotting the grammar in there, missing capitals. And again, if you're able to identify these things, punctuation's missing, your learners, again, are quite a fun activity. And I found that my learners really engaged with that because it was real to them. It was something that they might see, and they've perhaps seen adults doing it, and they quite like to correct people when they're wrong. Certainly my learners did. So anytime there's a spelling mistake in the board, they love to point that out. So again, it gets them using those literacy skills to analyse this piece of text. There's also some parts you might notice about for the persuasive writing there. Straight away I'm seeing this part about failure to do this within 24 hours will lead to restricted access to your account. Again, they're putting a time constraint in there. They're saying this needs to be done now. And for quite a lot of people who fall for scams, then that is quite often the technique that works, is to put that time constraint. I just get worried because it said if it didn't, I was going to lose access to my bank account, and I didn't want that to happen. So I just thought I'd click the link just to be sure. You can also see they're sorry for the inconvenience. So again, it might be that they're using flattery or trying to be kind and try to sound quite nice in there to persuade you as well. What is interesting about this one is, again, we've got a range of strategies, because as Scott talked about identifying the URL, you can't actually see the URL on this one. It's disguised by a button. And again, perhaps that's something we want to discuss with our learners as well, is, once we're aware that URLs can give us a clue as to what's happening, or if there's a scam or something that untoward might be hidden behind it, then this scammer has obviously put an image in with a hyperlink behind it, because they probably don't have the HTTPS
I think you've got to
appropriate
look at
extension. So
all the different
again, just knowing one strategy is
coming
enough
up
to
here,
stay
the
safe. We've got to
spelling
think
mistakes,
about a few of those. Scott, is there anything else to come in on that?
You then looked at the URL.
Just want to check the chat and see if anybody else has pointed anything else about that example email.
I think you're correct, John. I think you've got to look at all the different indicators that are coming up here, the spelling mistakes, the grammar, punctuation. But you then looked at the URL as well, and you were expecting the RBS, Royal Bank of Scotland, to be .co.uk, and it wasn't. It was .co.ru. It was Russian based. Then you would be going, oh no, there's something not quite right about this. And then adding these all up together, then you can make a more informed decision about whether you follow the link and put in your bank details or not.
And again, I think there in the chat, I'll just give a wee thumbs up there. I think Mrs. Riley said absolutely, that the images, the graphics might not look quite right. There might be a few things, looks like a copy and paste job. And again, there's a wee link there at the bottom of the slides that we'll share later on that links you to Royal Bank of Scotland, have some quite good guidance around how to spot things like email fraud. The other part I mentioned there was about critical literacy, and there's a load here. I've just copied this one from a literacy in English webinar I did a few weeks ago for primary learners, and again, great bits to take your learners down that road to explore it through your literacy learning, but bringing in that part about cyber resilience. So how do you recognise fact or fake news and websites? And again, it might be that probably doesn't cover the things like the URL, but that's something that you're able, hopefully after today, to be able to throw that in and take that understanding a little bit deeper. There's some great resources there from the GCF Global about digital media literacy, and it links really well with cyber resilience and internet safety, both aspects of that. And again, lots and lots of parts here about reading the news and understanding what's real and not real. And I think that the moving image education one's quite good about a YouTube. It's got a worksheet there that you can take the learners to any YouTube video and get them to really look at and scrutinise, the source. What's the purpose of this video? Why has this person uploaded this video? And what is it trying to get me to do? So although it's not quite rooted in the part about the device, it's getting learners at least to be that inquisitive and that suspicion about things that they're watching online. So it kind of sits a bit between the cyber resilience and internet safety, but I think it's really good to make those links to literacy and English learning, especially in that primary classroom where we're very often working across different disciplines. Last wee part from me here then is just this part about money. I just wanted to consider it. Again, and I'm aware that the E's and O's don't particularly talk about this in numeracy and maths when we're covering money, but what I would maybe ask you to consider is, and it'd be great if anyone's got any examples of how they've maybe approached this type of learning in their classroom, but if I was teaching money in my numeracy and maths timetable, although I'm talking really about adding up values and checking, comparing prices, or checking if I've got the right change, those kind of examples in the primary school, what I would be doing is planning my health and well-being at the same time, or my CRIS learning, whether that sits within a technologies or a health and well-being part of the timetable for yourself, however that works. But what I would be wanting to do is open up those discussions with my learners. Where do I spend money these days? What money do your young people have access to? Thinking back to when I got, I had a few glass bottles to take back to the shop for some spending money on sweets, but nowadays I doubt that learners are taking glass bottles or even a handful of change back to a shop to buy some sweets. They're probably, again, more likely ordering things off online stores such as Amazon or apps for their latest device. So might still be going and buying sweets with a handful of change, but I know certainly in my life I handle change very, very seldomly. Most of my transactions are taking place online or digitally through my bank card. So again, worth talking to learners about how they spend it, what they spend it on, and I think you'll get some fantastic understanding of what their digital money is from learners. And sometimes it might even be about opening it up to your learners and really letting them lead the learning there about their FIFA Ultimate Team points or their VBucks for Fortnite or whatever it's at Robux, I think, for Roblox. So lots and lots of places for young people to spend money. And again, I've put a link into a few different websites that I think might be quite useful there. See that My Money Sense bit, there's a whole section for teachers. The safe and being smart. So again, thinking about, probably less so in the current climate, but it can be quite straightforward with contactless payments and NFC to just lift money from someone's bank card when it's sitting in their pocket, or tapping someone's watch with the payment device. and lifting money. We hear stories about this. So what do learners do again to think about how they keep those devices, that, you know, their watch, their phone, their bank card, how do they keep those things safe as well? And the last part that I would really think that really comes in under the resilience part of that, and certainly the resilience in the learning going forward. Quite often learners can be tempted to get more for their money. They want things for free or for cheap. Some of these games can be quite expensive, even though Fortnite pitches itself as being free to play. You've got to pay for the passes to play online. You've got to, then there's a peer pressure to buy the latest skins and weapons and things like that. So I think the last estimate I saw, FIFA Ultimate Team, which is the kind of online part of that game, you're paying about £40-50 to buy the FIFA game, and it's costing roughly, to be competitive at Ultimate Team, anything between £1,000 and £3,000 per year to keep up with that, to have the top players, because the chances of opening those players from a pack are so low. So players can feel quite pressured into that. So again, that cyber resilience, how do you recognise that something is, you know, these are legitimate services, but how do you recognise that there's a part to this that you might be coerced into spending money that you didn't want to, you might be pressured into buying them? And I know that officially these kind of apps will say that there's no coercion, but there is very much, you'll see lots and lots of press around some of the strategies that they use to engage young people to spend more money. Again, put a couple of links to different reports there around that. So that's what I would be considering in the primary class, thinking about, you know, it's not necessarily my maths money lesson, but when I'm teaching money, it'd be quite good to have those sorts of discussions, perhaps in a sort of health and wellbeing context, and asking young people where they spend their money and how they keep that money safe when they're online, or recognising if they are being perhaps persuaded to spend more than they need to. But I'll pass back over to you, Scott.
We emphasise what George is saying when it comes to the money aspect of it as well. There's a lot of websites that are popping up where they're selling these VBucks cheaply, and that's where it links back to your URL, understanding the URL and where you can get it, these cheap VBucks from, other than going from the Fortnite store or the Microsoft store. There's other things like grey marketplaces that have popped up that will sell them for half price, and it's about understanding the risk associated with going to those places as well. And a good rule of thumb, you can see for the Procreator Fiscal there on the right hand side, if it's illegal on the street, it's going to be illegal online. So that ties in when we start looking at our responsibilities and our rights. And there's the 5 Rights programme that has come up for young Scott as well. So if you're linking back to our outcomes and experiences, our young people are informed and prepared to make the most of digital technology safely. And that's the Scottish Government saying that. But if you link back to our outcomes and experiences, where we need to know their responsibilities, and that's when we talked about their behaviours as well, when we talked about the behaviours that we model as well. And we need to obviously reinforce what's acceptable behaviours, and again that goes back to our safe, smart and kind message that we like to give out as well. However, that online bullying is not illegal, but some of the behaviours associated along that with the harassment and things like that will be illegal, and if they're making comments about young person's sexuality or religion, then that's illegal as well. But I think the key thing that we've got to remember when we're talking about the rights and responsibilities is the police will investigate any incidences, but it's up to the Procreator Fiscal to decide whether a young person is charged or not. And the age and stage of the behaviour, as George mentioned before, that young people are demonstrating can have an impact on whether it's legal or not as well. As George was saying earlier on about the self-generated images, all the stuff we're getting for the Safer Internet Centre is saying it's a problem for between young people between the age of 11 and 13. So we need to bear that in mind, and we're looking at our behaviours, what's acceptable behaviours, and that is a really good rule of thumb that we've got there from the Procreator Fiscal. If it's illegal on the street, it's going to be illegal online. So that's a good gauge for you and your staff to be thinking about when you're dealing with these incidences in school.
And I think as well, just that last week, but just to ask people, do you know, I think Scott might have answered it, but, you know, is cyber bullying legal or not? I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we'll probably encounter as teachers and educators is dealing with things like bullying and having that question that, you know, is it illegal to bully somebody? And I think, Scott, you can outline that in some parts about the, does it cross over from saying it one time, or is it if it's repeated? And again, those are the same kind of questions we might ask about bullying, and that's the same again between the law, between perhaps calling somebody a name one time might not be deemed illegal, but certainly to go on and continue to post stuff to harass somebody would be considered illegal. And as Scott mentioned as well about protected statuses as well. So as soon as you call someone a name that might impact on their protected status online, then again that's what I said right back at the start again about looking at that with the learners, but where the law comes into this, because they might think, but I just called somebody a name, but they've got to understand that there could be legal consequences to that. The last wee part here then is just to think about how you go forward. And there's quite a lot of text there, and it's really a slide for you to take away. I'm not going to talk through every example, but we've mentioned about making links to health and wellbeing topics, and certainly your internet safety fits very well in there, certainly around the sort of wellbeing and the being kind to each other, or how to have friendships online and how to deal with those and the falling outs that young people have. In my own experience, and it's just my experience, allowing the learners to share their thoughts and their experiences really makes that the more valuable. So I could put them onto an online activity or game that explains things about internet safety and cyber resilience, but to allow the learners to share that, to have real active learning where they participate in those discussions and those dialogues, is what really brings it to the fore. And we always give the example that if young people aren't using Facebook, for you to talk about the dangers of Facebook ceases to be relevant. So you've got to be talking about what young people are doing. I certainly wouldn't want to think that I was an expert to know what any young person was doing online. What I quite often do is make use of my I've got two younger cousins. I quite often ask them, what have you been up to online recently, and what is it you're doing, what's happening most recently, what games are you playing, what apps are you using. And it's really interesting to hear from them how they use those apps, and again to be able to use my kind of adult brain to think about there's a potential for risk there, so that's definitely worth considering. In terms of assessment, we pointed out those key aspects earlier on about passwords, but how do you assess that your learners know about passwords? Can be quite straightforward with things like quizzes, but how do you assess whether they're actually putting that into action? How do you check that young people are using passwords? Are reports of online, risk taking, is that going up? Are your learners sharing more with you about somebody tried to get into my account, and are they sharing more examples because they're more aware, or are they reporting less because they've become quite good at dodging any kind of online risks? So again, I don't quite have an answer to you. That is when I'd be asking, how do you assess that kind of learning? How do you know that your learners, again, it's quite easy to know, to check their knowledge and understanding with quizzes and things, but how do we check that they're putting into action, that they're not doing these online behaviours that are unwanted or illegal? How do we check that with our learners? How do we assess that and make sure that they're making progress with the application of that knowledge and understanding? So again, it'd be great to hear from people either in the chat or the evaluation at the end, or sharing with us in DigiLearn Scott, which will come in a wee moment. And again, parental engagement is absolutely huge here, and again, great to hear from people on how you are engaging with parents. There's different, do you involve your community learning development colleagues that are out there and local authorities? Is it using the police to come in and deliver discussions with learners or parents? Is it your parents' night? We quite often had a wee internet safety desk with some people sitting, whoever didn't have a class would maybe do a wee bit of parents' night. We're using the parent zone materials there to try and engage with parents whenever they're in school for things like assemblies and stuff as well, if it's able to do that, or perhaps you get a couple of learners doing that. So any ideas around how you engage with parents, because again, if we are talking to our young people and children about this, but ultimately when they go home, it's their parents that are giving them that free rein. If they're given free rein, it's the parents that are allowing them to do anything online that might be dangerous or illegal. So just with that in mind, just have that think then about going back to recognise, react, recover. Just to recap that, we want young people to be prepared for those deliberate attacks, or as Scott mentioned at the start, the accidental events, doing things that we didn't intend to do. And that's because the Scottish Government wants young people prepared to make the most of technology safely. It brings us to the end. I'm just going to come back to the evaluation a wee second, and just quickly mention the Digital Schools Award if you haven't already signed up to that, and well worth having a look at signing up to that and using that evaluation framework to support development in your school. There's also a Cyber Resilience Internet Safety badge that goes along with the Digital Schools Award. So perhaps you've got the Digital Schools Award for your school, and the Cyber Resilience Internet Safety badge is the next step, or perhaps it's the first step for you, but they don't have to be done in tandem, but it can be quite good to obviously line up the development in your school around those two. And the last wee part there is just at DigiLearn Scott, I'll share the link in a wee moment as well. Get involved with that. If you go to digilearn.scott, top right corner, there's a wee, that you'll see that image there, and you can get tell us your story. So what is happening with your class, your school, your learning community? How are you engaging learners in cyber resilience, in particular with regard to this webinar? If there's any of the ideas, as we spoke about at the start, that the one thing that you want to take forward from this webinar and how you develop that, what does that look like? We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to get an example of that. And it'd be great to share that with our online community. And again, you could share those examples in this team as well if you so wish to. But that's everything from me. I don't know, Scott, if you've got anything to add at the end to recap. But
look at your internet safety as being the person and being safe, smart and kind. Where your cyber resilience is more about the device, looking at your 3 R's to cyber resilience. Okay, so you recognise, react and recover. It's a nice easy way to teach it, and hopefully after this evening you'll be more confident in teaching it along the URL lines that we give an example there, where you can find them in phishing emails. That's also a good skill when you get them looking at the Googling. When you Google something, the URL box is right to get into the habit of reading that URL. Again, the ability to read the URL and understand how it's made up, I would probably say is a key skill moving forward within cyber resilience. It's just as important as internet safety. So if you're doing an internet safety lesson, you can look at the web pages and look at the URL and how that's made up. That's all I've got to add, so thanks for your time.
Thanks very much for joining us, and we hope you found this webinar useful. Please keep an eye on our DigiLearn site, our Twitter and our YouTube channel for updates and more videos like this. Thanks again for joining us. Stay safe.